Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to sit with me and to hear what I have to say. It really means a lot that you've done that. So, I'm a mystery school initiate, and as many of you know, and I've mentioned before, one of the jobs I've been given is to teach the mysteries, to open the books, and teach some of this hidden knowledge, so that people will have the opportunity to understand it, should they want to. I don't have any real expectation that you believe me. I don't need you to believe me. It's not important that you do. Although I think this would be easier if you did. Right? The mystery school I'm a part of doesn't have a name, and which makes it difficult. And so I don't have, let's say, I don't have a Masonic ring or something to show you. We don't do anything like that. But what I do have is I do have knowledge. And I'm giving it away for free to you to do with as you please. And the problem we face when someone like me or other people try and explain these things, and by these things I mean we'll say the all-seeing eye, for example, which we're going to talk about today, is that there is a fucking shit ton of philosophy that is expected that you know, and when you're presented with a symbol like this. There is a lot that is baked in. I consider him a mentor, even though he's long dead. He's a personal hero of mine, Manly P. Hall. I've never met him, but he is definitely my hero. One of the things he has said, and he is spot on, is that a symbol is only as complex as the person who observes it. So these symbols are alive, so meaning that what they mean and what they do for the person will grow as the person grows and matures. And so if you're just starting out, at the most basic level, a symbol will mean one thing, but as you grow, it will expand and mean a lot more things than just one thing. So the point that I'm trying to say is this. What we're about to go through is complicated. There is a lot of moving parts. If you don't understand it on the offset, don't worry, you're not dumb. At least, probably you're not dumb. I'm sure there's someone out there who is, but it's probably not you. I'm sorry, that was probably a mean joke. I'm not trying to be mean. You're not dumb, it's just complicated. We have to deal with some philosophy. You're going to have to hold multiple ideas in your head at the same time. These things are living symbols. They represent a form and function of the universe. You cannot answer them with a simple one-off explanation, which is what a lot of people try and do. So my goal is to go into this and explain to the best of my ability what this what this freaking symbol represents, right? It's a complicated symbol. The all-seeing eye is a very complicated symbol, way more complicated than people make it out to be. If someone tries to give you a one-off explanation for this thing, chances are they don't either understand it or they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. All right, these things are complicated things. Understand? So, sit back, relax, enjoy yourself, and I'm going to do my best to go through this as best I can. And hopefully I can get this done before my wife comes home. We have 2 small children, and they're very noisy, and my mic picks up everything. So this will be an interesting adventure. So there are really 3 major parts to the all-seeing eye, and technically there's 4, but it's for all intents and purposes, there's 3 main parts to the symbol. In symbology, there are things called, well, first off, before we even get into that, symbology is a language. Esoteric symbology is its own language, as I'm sure you're perfectly capable of figuring out on your own. You don't need me to tell you that. At least I hope not. Which is more, it's a language that is specific to a very specific set of knowledge. There is a knowledge base that is held by the people who are involved in the mysteries. We all share one philosophy. Now, knowledge is a tricky business. What you do with the knowledge determines the person rather than the knowledge itself. So knowledge is like a kitchen knife, for example, right? I could use a kitchen knife to cook, to chop up vegetables, and cook a lovely dinner for my family. In which case, the kitchen knife is a good and benevolent tool, capable of good things. However, the potential that exists within the kitchen knife is that of chaos and destruction, because I could take that kitchen knife, and instead of feeding my family, I could murder my family and create grave harm to those who are around me. And this is the way knowledge is. So, when I say that we all share the same knowledge and understand the same philosophy, I'm not saying that the motivations in every mystery school is exactly the same. I'm saying we share a similar language. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind. So, again, it's one language, speaking about a very specific kind of knowledge, which is the knowledge of the divine realms, sacred knowledge, mystery school knowledge, which is the form and functions of truth, the forms and functions of the gods, the order of divinities, that sort of thing. That is specifically what mystery school symbology is trying to symbolize. Okay? Get it? Another thing to keep in mind is, like what I was saying before, is there's a thing called, in symbology, called archetype. And an archetype, if we think of a symbol as though it is a sentence, the archetype represents the subject of the sentence. So if I was to say, a king, if I was to draw a picture of a king, most people would get that archetype in its various forms, right? Whether we're talking simply about authority in general, whether we're talking about a monarchy as a form of government, whether we're talking about a divine right to rule, whether we're talking about status symbols, you know, there's a lot that's baked into the symbol of a king, for example. And if I put something around the king, we'll say like it's his cup or his cup bearer, or we could even say like his, the word escapes me now suddenly, his scepter, right? That, by adding another element on top of this, top of the subject, will tell the symbol reader what the subject is doing. So in that way, what people don't realize is that there's multiple different all-seeing eyes. And depending on what the organization or the person is trying to say, different things will be added on top of the all-seeing eye. For instance, there's the Norse all-seeing eye, which is one eye closed and the other eye open. There's a few other organizations that share this, but this is the Norse all-seeing eye. You have the Egyptian all-seeing eye, which is the eye of Horus, and the eye of Ra, which is, you've probably seen it. It has like, it's kind of elongated, and it has two things that are kind of poking out the bottom, and then an eyebrow along the top. Everyone has seen it. You could Google it right now, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Then we have the all-seeing eye that probably most people are most familiar with, which is the Masonic all-seeing eye, which is the eye inside an equilateral triangle. So the eye by itself means one thing. Then of course you have the Saturnian all-seeing eye, where the Saturnian all-seeing eye is also called the horned eye. You've probably seen this. If you've ever seen any of the, I'm trying to remember where the last place I saw one was. I think I saw one in a Kesha video, if I'm not mistaken, and also in a Fanta commercial. If you want to see dark occult symbology embedded in plain sight, go check out a Fanta commercial, some of the new ones that they've come out with. It's finger painted with occult symbology. Anyway, and then you also have like the weeping eye or the bleeding eye. That is also an all-seeing eye. But each time you add an element like that, it is not changing the archetype, it is saying what the archetype is doing. And it'll tell you what the philosophy is behind either the person or the organization that is putting it forward. You understand? So, another thing to keep in mind is that, simply put, there are two different kinds of information. More complexly put, there are strata of different kinds of information that are put out to different people or given to different people based on their different levels of initiation. But we don't have time for that. But just keep that in mind. So the quick skip a lot of things version is that there are two different basic types of information. You have the exoteric information and you have the esoteric information. Exoteric comes from the Greek word esoterikos, which means out of or outside of. This is why, or basically put, it's exoteric information is information that exists outside of the walls of the temple. This is where we get the word exoskeleton from. And it's also the place where we get the word exterior from, or excuse. And exterior is you have interior and exterior. interior is inside the building. Exterior is outside of the building, outside the walls of the home. An exoskeleton is not a skeleton that is inside, it's a skeleton that is outside of the organism, like what an insect would have. Right? That is an exoskeleton. So exoteric is, or exoterikos, or exoteric knowledge, is knowledge that is outside of, or the knowledge that is given, more simply put, it is knowledge that is given to the masses. So, then on the opposite end, you have esoteric, not exoteric, esoteric. Esoteric comes from the Greek word esoterikos, which means knowledge that is inside. Inside. Knowledge that dwells within the walls of the temple. The simplest way of thinking that is this is knowledge that is held by the priesthood. Now, of course, not all levels of the priesthood are going to have access to all the different levels of knowledge. And that is where we get into things that are a little bit more complex. And that is just beyond the scope of what I'm able to cover in a podcast such as this. Okay. So, the exoteric, the knowledge that is outside the walls of the temple, that is given to the masses regarding the all-seeing eye. And now I have to qualify this by saying I'm speaking of just the eye. Okay, we're talking about just the eye. We're not talking about anything else that's added onto it. No triangles, no horns, nothing. Understand? Just the eye. The all-seeing eye, if you look it up in a source book, for example, that you find at Barnes & Noble. Right? If you pick up a source book from Barnes & Noble, or you Google it, you look at Wikipedia, what they're going to say is that the all-seeing eye either represents the eye of God, or if you're more conspiratorial, it'll say something like the all-seeing eye represents the ever-watchful present observations of the Illuminati. And technically true, both of those things can be true. Right? And that's the thing with exoteric knowledge, is that they're not technically a lie. There is pieces of truth in there. However, it's so watered down and distilled and decomplicated, and that it barely represents the actuality of the thing. Right? It's like taking all the complexities that go into a car. My son is 3. He likes cars and trucks. So it's like, we'll say a truck. It's like taking a pickup truck, and we all know what goes involved with the truck, right? You have the engine and the drivetrain and the starter and all the belts and the way the fuel is injected and the transmission and the way that gears work and the way that it pushes the tires forward, and shocks and suspension and load carrying capacity and all that mathematics and technical know-how, and down to the metallurgy of the bed and the metallurgy of the hubcaps and all of that, right? There's so much science that's packed into what goes into just a simple pickup truck. It's like taking all of that and then drawing a 2-dimensional picture and giving it to my son, right? Which is just basically like a square and 2 rectangles with 2 circles for wheels. That is kind of what I'm talking about when we deal with exoteric knowledge. It's so dumbed down that you lose the profundity of what is actually going on in the symbol. And which is why it's going to be I'm probably going to have to break this into 2 parts because, frankly, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through it in an hour. And I'm working on a time constraint because I think my wife is probably going to walk in the door and then I'm going to be screwed. So if my wife does walk in the door, we're going to have to do a part 2 anyway. So the eye, right? The eye it's that. So basically, there is, people don't realize this, but there's actually 3 parts, technically 4, but for simplicity's sake, there's actually 3 parts to the all-seeing eye. You have the almond-shaped portion, right? That almond-shaped portion is actually a shorthand for a symbol that is, and now off the top of my head, for some reason, I can't remember what it's called. Crap. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's where those, basically it's when if you take 2 circles and you kind of bring them over so they slightly overlap on their edges, and it creates that almond shape. You have one on top and you have another on the bottom. And now, for some reason, I can't, the name of what that is called escapes me, and I can't remember really what that is. But so you create that center, basically a vagina there in the middle. And, we still use this a lot in universities in different ways. Like if you want to explain, let's say, golly, just as an example. So it's like if you take 2 things of opposite natures and you want to see the parts that share a similarity, you use this graph, basically. Like we would say, like, what do the Democrats and the Republicans agree on? And so you write down all the things that they disagree on, and then in the center almond section, you write down the things that they would agree on. Right? Murder is bad. These kinds of things. So, in a more basic but slightly more complicated sense, the all-seeing eye represents the unification of a paradoxical idea. All right. That's a slightly more complicated version than God is just watching you. It represents, again, the unification of a paradoxical idea. Two things that are opposite in nature, that are different in degree. When you take those 2 things and you bring them together, what is the similarities? What is the unification of the paradox of chaos and order? Or chaos and cosmos? What is the unification of the paradox between creation and destruction? What is the unification of the paradox of, we'll say, like light and darkness? Okay. And again, another thing to keep in mind here is that symbols are multidimensional. And this is part of the reason this becomes tough, because this symbol represents a spiritual idea, a mental phenomenon, and something physical. So it represents the brain, it represents the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine principles of the mind, and also represents the order of the heavens. I'm going to say that again because it's important. Right, we're talking specifically about the almond-shaped eye now, which is made up of 2 circles that are brought together to create an almond shape in the middle. It represents the brain, the right side of the brain, the left side of the brain, and the pineal gland unification principle in the middle. It represents the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine portion of the mind, and the place where they are unified and create the mental birth canal, which gives birth to what's called the beloved son. And the beloved son is the thing that has given birth into the physical reality. It's taken out of the plane of the mind and into physical reality. All right. And the spiritual way of looking at it is that it's actually a toroidal shape. If you don't know what a toroidal shape is, I really encourage you to stop the podcast right now, go to Google and type in a torus shape or a torus-shaped electromagnetic field, and you'll see some animations of what I'm talking about. It kind of looks like a donut. It's like, excuse me. It's like when energy is pushed out, it kind of goes out, goes back down, and it's kind of sucked back up. A little bit like what a black hole would look like if you were to zoom out and see both of its ends, or a wormhole. It's like this this donut-looking thing where energy comes back out and it's sucked back in again. All right. So I'm trying to figure out what is the best way of starting this. So one of the things that I do is that it is the way the mysteries are taught, or they're supposed to be taught orally. And so when I record these, I don't use notes, and I teach you as though I'm teaching somebody else. And so I don't do a lot of practice beforehand. I teach you live, essentially speaking. And so sometimes I have to stop and think for a minute to figure out the best way to go about explaining this. In the mysteries, okay, this is where to begin. The first arcanum of the mysteries. An arcanum is something that must be known first before all other things can be known and understood in their appropriate contexts. Meaning that there is nothing that can be understood without knowing a specific thing first. So, the first arcanum of the mysteries, the first secret that is told to initiates, is this. You are dead. This is the underworld. Understand? Meaning, if you're a Christian, this is the Christian hell. This is the place of the wailing and gnashing of teeth. If you are asatru or heathen, this is, well, hell. The Christians borrowed it from the Norse. Hell is actually a Norse goddess. She's the goddess of the underworld. Same, kind of similar to Persephone. And Loki would be, technically speaking, I think maybe Loki would be god of the underworld too, but that's another topic. Anyway, this is the labyrinth of Theseus. Right? This is the dark underworld. This is the place of the wailing and gnashing of teeth. This is where you suffer forever until you get out, until you learn your lessons and you escape. So, all knowledge needs to first be filtered through this idea. If we take the all-seeing eye and we understand that the eye shape is actually a doorway between two different places in space and time. The underworld is on the bottom. The land of the gods, Asgard, is on top. The middle is called Midgard, land of the living. The assumption that the mystery schools allow other people to think, it's called a blind, right? A blind is a mystery school device to keep secrets. Basically, an over amount of emphasis is put on certain information to encourage someone to come to a wrong conclusion. The blind that people don't understand is that you are dead. We allow people to think that you're alive. In truth, you're not actually alive, you're actually dead. This is death. You want to know what it's like to die? This is what it's like to die. This is being interred. This is your interment. Your body is your tomb. Understand? So you can't understand this without first understanding this first. You're entombed. So, you live in the bottom circle. If we take our two circles that create the almond shape and we put them one on top of the other, like a fraction, you are on the bottom. The gods live in the top portion. And there is a place in the middle where gods and man intersect. In the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, this all-seeing eye portion of it is called Sekhep-Hepspet. And let's see, I'll try and spell it for you. I don't know if I can. I think it's S-E-K, Sek. I don't know. I can't spell it. Sekhep-Hepspet or something like that. I can't. It's an Egyptian word. I can't pronounce it. I am sorry. Anyway, it's that middle portion. It's that doorway. You have heard Jesus say, for example, that no man comes to the Father except through me. It's because Jesus, like he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, right? He represents, in the Christian mysteries, now this isn't going to be something you're going to find in church. It's not exoteric knowledge. This is esoteric knowledge. The esoteric knowledge in the Christian mysteries is that Jesus represents that doorway into another place, which is why we see in Christian iconography all the time either Jesus, his mother, or Jesus and his mother standing inside of this womb-shaped object. Understand? It's because that womb, think of a woman's vagina. That womb represents a portal to a different dimension. The woman's vagina is a portal for spirits to come into our world. It's the way that a spirit becomes interred in the underworld. That is that mechanism. Okay. That is what brings one spirit from a different state of matter into a entirely different lower state. But this is a two-way street, and this is where the philosophy gets kind of thick here, is that you have to understand that death and birth are exactly the same thing. There is no objective difference between being born and dying as far as the mystery schools are concerned. In fact, the order of things in modern parlance, in the way that we typically are taught to think of things, we think of things as linear time. We think in terms of linear time. We think of it. The average person is taught, first you're born, then you live, and then you die. Period. the way the ancients thought, and that the way it is understood in the actual mystery schools, is that time is cyclical. In fact, time is like a slinky. If you take a slinky and you look at it like it's a tube, it looks like it's a circle, right? If you look straight down it, it looks like a circle. It's cyclical. Time is a fixed corkscrew, for example, and you move along the corkscrew. And so, what we're taught is first you're born, then you live, then you die. In the mystery schools, that is not the case. The mystery schools see time as a snake that eats its own tail, meaning where the birth and death happen at the exact same place. Meaning that birth and death are the exact same phenomenon. The only difference is which side of the portal you're observing it from. As when you die as a spirit, quote unquote, you're born in the underworld. You come here. If you're slain in the spirit, as people, they like to say, you're not actually, your consciousness doesn't disappear. You just shift to a different state of matter. You shift to a lower state. You're born into a lower dimension. You die in one side, you fall through the vagina, and come out into a different dimension. Birth and death are the same thing. And this is the mystery of Jacob's ladder, by the way, where Jacob is laying asleep and he sees this ladder that goes up to heaven and people are going and coming from it. And that's that symbol of that almond-shaped symbol. That is what that represents. It's that doorway. And now, the reason you have that circle with a dot in the middle, and technically it's two symbols. The dot means one thing and the circle means something else. But for all intents and purposes, for the sake of time, we'll say that the circle ultimately represents gold, and it represents the sun, and it represents light. In fact, the circle with the dot in it is the oldest symbol basically known to man. It is the symbol that represents the sun. All right, it's the symbol that represents the sun. And you can find this symbol on cave walls that are probably hundreds of thousands of years old, for all we know. People will disagree with that number, and frankly, I don't care. Disagree with the number. It's freaking old. All right. It's the oldest symbol. Now, again, a circle is time, and a dot is unification. A dot is unification. Basically put, without, we can't go down that rabbit hole too far because we'll get lost. But essentially it means the sun. It's illumination. It's the sun up in the sky. It also means the sun as in the beloved sun, in which we just talked about before. It's the thing that is made manifest into physical reality. It's the transference of spiritual principle into physical principle. From the plane of mentality, the plane of the mind, or the plane of causes, into the plane of effects. Everything you see in your world that you can observe, taste, or touch, that is all the product of something that was once in somebody's mind and is now in a physical place. It's in a physical reality. Do you understand? I'm drinking a carbonated beverage at the moment. That carbonated beverage was first, before it ever became manifest in the real world, first it was envisioned by somebody else or a group of people. And when those two circles come together, the sacred masculine portion of their minds and the sacred feminine portion of their minds, that can of carbonated beverage shows up in the physical reality, which is known as the beloved Son. It's complicated. Like I said, if you don't understand it, it doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means it's complicated. I highly encourage you to take out a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and just draw it out. Two circles intersecting in the middle, creating that almond shape, vagina shape there in the middle. So, the sun up in the sky, as well as the idea of the sun, S-O-N and S-U-N in the mysteries are interchangeable. The ideas are interchangeable. They both represent the same thing. If that's confusing, I know it's confusing. I understand. You're not dumb. Again, I'm just saying that because it's confusing. It is. It's hard to wrap your mind around, and it's designed to be that way on purpose. All right? Ideas are difficult in the mysteries on purpose. That's why not everyone could be in a mystery school initiate. Because it's through that struggle that we become strong. Meat for the strong men, milk for the babes. As I think that was from Paul. I think Paul said that in the Bible. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. But anyway. Where was I? So the sun represents illumination, knowledge, gnosis, wisdom. And it also represents the transitional principle, the thing that changes something from one state of matter into another. You take a log or a piece of paper, you heat that you speed up the electrons in the piece of paper, like let's say your mind, right? Your mind is firing. You're trying to work out some complicated problem like the all-seeing eye. And so those electrons start speeding up in your brain. And eventually those electrons, like in the paper, for example, sticking with the paper for analogy, eventually they start to smoke, they start to heat up, they start to smoke, and eventually they're burst into flames. And that fire that comes out of that light, transference into light, represents the transference from a lower state of matter into a higher state of matter. Which is why that symbol of light keeps coming back over and over and over again in mystery school philosophy. It's because that's the whole story behind alchemy, even. You heat something up until all its lower principles, all of its base nature burns off, essentially, and you're left with gold. That's the transference from lead, which is a shit metal, into gold, which is symbolically speaking, it's a perfect metal. It's the most purest metal. Right, so that's the turning lead into gold. Mental alchemy. And that almond-shaped aspect where the two worlds meet, and the eye in the middle, which is the sun, circle with the dot in the middle, is the sun. It represents that place where one state of matter is shifted into a different state of matter. It's a transitional principle. Okay, so remember, another way of thinking about it is like this. I don't remember if I had said this yet or not. Mystery school symbols are written as though you're standing inside the temple looking out. Okay, this is very true, especially in Masonic philosophy. It's true in Norse philosophy and the Norse mysteries that I'm a part of. It's true in most mystery schools that I am aware. Okay. So you're sitting in the lower circle. You're looking up through the vagina of the earth. And on the other side, you see the sun. You see the Son of God. You see the light of and the glory of God shining through the hole in the sky. The earth is the watery planet. It's the watery mother. And the sun shining out through its vagina. So you're in the darkness. The light is bursting through the sky. It's coming through that hole. It's coming through that portal into the earth and filling the earth with light. And above that, through the sun, through that hole in the sky, is where the land of the living is. Which is why when we die, we often hear people describe seeing a light at the end of a tunnel. We hear that over and over again. You hear people say, it's a light at the end of the tunnel. And that light at the end of the tunnel is that divine spark. It's the logos. It's the thing that makes all things manifest. It's the pure being. You know, ever hear, oh crap, I don't want to get it wrong. I feel, is it Plato? Is it Plato who had the analogy of the cave? Do you remember that? Where there's these guys who are stuck in this cave and their faces are fixed. And then there's a fire behind them and they see the shadows on the wall. And so they have a whole philosophy and worldview based around these shadows they see on the wall. But then one guy escapes and he sees everything. He sees the fire. He sees the people walking behind him. He sees all of it. He escapes through the cave and out through that vagina at the end of the cave. And then all that light bursts into view, and suddenly he sees everything for what it truly is. And so ultimately, the all-seeing eye represents when it's all broken down, all that philosophy we've just covered over the last 47.40 minutes. I don't know if that's true. 47 and a half minutes. Is boiled down to one thing, and really that means gnosis. It means gnosis. Knowledge. There's a specific key that is known in the mysteries, and it's called, in the way the key works, I'm sorry. The key states, that's the word I was looking for. The key states, I know, therefore I see. And I see, therefore I live. I'm going to say that again. I know, therefore I see. And I see, therefore I live. The people, so if we look through the myths, and you read them as though they're mystery school documents, you read them as though they're a book of symbols. Whenever you encounter anything that causes you not to see, so when you encounter someone who's dead, someone who's blind, someone who's asleep, someone who's dwelling in darkness, someone who's a light that's under a bushel, someone who's been placed in the ground, all of these things, my friends, are representations of a lack of knowledge, a lack of when someone's fallen asleep and they no longer know anymore. So when Adam was put to sleep in order to create Eve, what does that mean? When Abraham says, when the fathers fell asleep, what does that mean? when Jesus dies on the cross and goes to the underworld, what does that mean? When the lights go out, what does that mean? When Jesus dies on the cross, the lights go out. What does that mean? Especially if we already know that in mystery school philosophy that we live in the underworld. Jesus didn't die here. He died in the Sekep-Hepspet, the place on the other side of the sun, and the lights went out up there. The sun went out. Then he came to the underworld to set the captives free, to break the chains of death. Do you understand? The all-seeing eye means gnosis. Means knowledge. It's that transitional, transformational principle. The more I know, the more I live. The more I know, the more I see. The more I see. There's that old saying, perception is reality. That's why they say you make your own heaven and you make your own hell. What you see around you, what you perceive around you, you create for yourself. It's a paradox. How do you want to, if you want to live in heaven, you have to create that for yourself. That's one of the things that the unification principle that the mysteries have with this particular paradox is, are you saved or do you save yourself? Are you saved from the underworld or do you save yourself? And the answer is both. I like to think of it, a good way of putting it, to help you wrap your brain around this idea, is that the gods give us a kit to build a boat. We're drowning in the water, and they give us a kit to build a boat. We have to make the decision on whether or not we want to be set free, and we have to do the work to earn it. So they give us the tools to set ourselves free. And in that way, they are saving us. They are saving us from our sins. But we have to do the work to get there, to earn our salvation in that way, if you know what I mean. We have to do the work to climb a Jacob's ladder, to get out of the underworld, to break through that transformational principle, that place in the sky that we break out of and we are lit on fire and all that nonsense is burnt off of us and we're transformed into something new and something greater than ourselves. Clear as mud? When we actively think, our pineal gland opens up. That's the most basic form of enlightenment. In its lowest form. It's simply thinking. Taking the time to actually think. When your neurons fire, they could take a picture of your brain. They could actually see your brain physically light up. And when both parts of your brain are lit up, your pineal gland in there actually has rods and cones like an eye, like an actual eye. It's not as organized as your eye is because it's not trying to take in external stimuli like our eyes are. They're taking in the light that is emitted from your brain. It's the eye of the brain. Which is why the all-seeing eye, and the pineal gland. If you slice the brain right down I forget what it's called, the cavity between the two sides of the brain. I forget what it's called. If you slice that right directly in half, and you look at the pineal gland, it looks like the eye of Horus, for example. It looks just like it. The unification of those two principles. You bring those together, the eye lights up. Two portions of the mind. It's important to bear in mind that, bear in mind, because my name is Bear, get it? Bear in mind. Sorry, never mind. Yeah, the mind doesn't exist within your body. That's a weird thing to say. People assume it does. The mind is external from yourself. Okay? The brain is a counterfeit, lesser version of what your mind is that exists on a higher plane than you do. The spirit, then the mind, is a counterfeit, lesser version of your spirit who exists above the mind. Think of it as like a string of beads. So the mind has a sacred masculine side and a sacred feminine side. They both do different things, and I'm going to do a thing for the podcast about the law of gender and the way gender works as a mental phenomenon. And that'll help explain some of this. But there's a sacred masculine side and a sacred feminine side. Those two things, those two principles, have very specific jobs that they do, and when they come together in the appropriate mixture, they create something into the physical world. Hence my can of fizzy soda, right? Or you deciding you want a cup of coffee and you create a cup of coffee. Then on the spiritual side, the workings of a spiritual nature, you have what we just talked about, and this kind of falls into a little bit of astrotheology. Astrotheology is the study of the suns, planets, and stars as divine celestial beings, or at the very minimum, astrotheology is the spiritual principles associated with planetary bodies. And so on the spiritual level, we live in the underworld. The Son of God sits above the vagina of the earth, and all that radiance, all that glory from the spiritual realms that live above us. We think we live in light during the daytime, but we actually dwell in darkness. It's the sun that peeps through that secret, sacred vagina that gives us light in the daytime. And it's up to us as a spirit to ascend out of the underworld, get birthed into the light of Gnosis, into the light of day, at the other side of the hole in the sky, and then be born into the land of the living. And then from there, onto the land of the gods. Now, the temptation will be for someone to take this and will try and show me pictures that NASA has taken of the sun. I get it. I get that it's a physical object. If you want to understand this stuff, you have to be willing to hold 2, 3, 5 ideas in your head at the same time. One of the major things we do in the mystery schools, it's called the unification of the paradoxes. It's a paradox. How can the sun be a ball of gas floating in space and be a portal to a different dimension? What makes both of those ideas true at once? And that is the true test. Because it's not one or the other. It is, in fact, is actually both things. And the true masters can do that. They can reconcile those two major ideas. And that's important to remember. Okay. I'm at about an hour. Now I think it's probably a good place to stop. And I actually got through most of that. So, now you know what the eye by itself represents. It represents everything we just covered. Now, you could take that idea, that archetype, this idea that is known to everyone who is in the mysteries, at least people who are at least part way through their training. This is more advanced than the first initiate, than the first tier of initiates, but it's not as advanced as the higher tier. So most people who are relatively far into this will know this. And so when you watch a movie and you see an eye, an all-seeing eye, for example, you have some idea of what they're referring to. Now, when you see a Hollywood celebrity cover up their eye, that means something. When you see a horned eye, that means something else. If you see a weeping eye, that means something else. Right? If you see an eye in an equilateral triangle of the Masons, that means something else. So that's important to keep in mind and to understand. And I hope that all makes sense. I hope I didn't confuse you too much. But it's worth studying. It's worth keeping that in mind. And I can guarantee you, I mean, I've been studying this for a long time, and I've never heard anyone else explain it. I've never had anyone ever break it down like that. It doesn't mean that they're not out there somewhere, but especially on YouTube and the truth community and all of these people, I've never heard someone actually break it down like that and in its full detail. And that's because most people aren't initiated. Now, congratulations, you know more than most. So, okay, you guys and gals and folks of all ages, I hope that did something for you. I want you to be happy. I want you to be free. I want you to understand what is happening around us. I want you to be able to see in the true scope of the esoteric meaning of that word. And I hope that you have a really great day and that the gods look out for you and that the All-Father smiles upon you and all that good stuff. Okay? Have a good night, and I'll talk to you in a little bit. Bye.